Welcome back to Artificial Antics, where Rico and Mike will talk about the implications and opportunities around artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. On this episode, we continue our conversation with David Hirschfeld, CEO of Tekyz. Last time, we discussed his AI journey, the launch-first approach, and how startups can use AI for growth. Now, we're covering AI adoption, workflow automation, and the future of development. David also shares insights on scaling businesses with AI. Let's jump back in.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Artificial Antics, and I'm here with my co-host, Mike. Mike, if you want to say a quick hi.
Hey, everyone.
We're here with David Hirschfeld, and as you remember from our last episode, we talked about David's company, Tekyz, and one of his products that he offers is called Launch First. David's been in tech a long time, and we kind of talked about his journey into AI and some successful use cases with AI. And without further ado, we'll let David get into the business side of what AI can do for you.
Thanks. Great to see you guys again, Mike and Rico, and really looking forward to the discussion today. For the audience, I'll tell a little bit about me and where I come from. So I was in enterprise when I started in over 35 years ago in software for large companies like Intel, Motorola, Allied Signal, Texas Instruments, and then had my own startup in 92, and which we built and sold to a publicly traded firm in 2000. And then I ran VP of products for the company that acquired us for the next 3 years until I cast out again and started Tekyz almost 18 years ago in 2007. And Tekyz is a custom software development shop. And lately it's a custom AI development shop because that's all there is anymore. It seems like is the focus on AI for many reasons. One is because everybody that's coming to us has some AI requirement. If not, they're building an AI product that they want us to build. And also because we automate a lot of stuff internally in Tekyz and recognize that AI is changing every aspect of software development and design and workflow automation and how we have to approach all this. So it's really captivated us and it put us in a position where we are literally reinventing ourselves almost every month. Who we are, what we do, how we go about what we do, and what direction we're headed to try to stay ahead of this massive wave that is AI.
Definitely. And David, just for the audience, can you tell us, how can a small business start identifying tasks for the automation or workflows?
So that's a really important question and a tough one to answer because I could give you a lot of trite responses on what you should be looking for, manual tasks, things like that. But usually in a small business, a lot of these things are part of your DNA of operating. If you're a profitable business and successful, then you get into this manual workflow of doing these things on a regular basis. You understand and handling all the nuances of what it takes to do these things, not even recognizing how many nuances you're handling because you've handled them so many times. So in the past, when I've gone through workflow automation with a client, a good example is a friend of mine that runs a really big business network, and we did a workflow automation with him. It took 3 months, not 3 months of effort, but 3 months of going back and forth, probably total of 30 hours or 40 hours of development effort. But 3 months of going back and forth with him, teasing out all the nuances. Every time we'd come up with a new build and show him, he would realize that he had missed some of the requirements in certain of the cases. And at the end of those 3 months, we had something that worked. And this was somebody who spent 7 hours every Monday getting ready for this big networking meeting every Tuesday morning. And it's complex because of the way he runs his meetings and how big his network is. And that workflow automation, which he didn't even know he could automate it, I suggested he should consider doing this based on things he had told me. And he said, okay, let's do it. It takes him now 15 minutes to do his Monday. And every time we talk, he tells me, I still use that program you wrote for me 4 years ago. And I just every Monday like clockwork, and it's just amazing. Anyway, but there was like 40 hours, maybe 50 hours of actual programming work and quite a bit of time for us to tease out all the nuances. So a lot of small businesses are full of these types of workflows, and that's not the only workflow he's got that's really time consuming. And it rarely is, right? So now I'll talk a little bit about like what we're starting to do internally. So we have this idea of trying to document workflows that we have that we know are repetitive in what we call playbooks, because we want to be able to scale. And if we bring in somebody new that's going to be doing that thing, if it's a marketing task or a sales task or development automation task or whichever it is, we want to be able to give them the playbook for them to learn, so they know what are all the steps to do and what are the nuances that they may run into and how to address those. Now, what I'm starting to realize is that for any of these playbooks, we need to be thinking in terms of taking the playbook and now using AI to start to automate that playbook. Asking AI, okay, here's my playbook for this particular thing. Do you see anything that I could improve in the playbook? Number one, because it may come up with things that I didn't even realize that are duplications of work, just because it's something we've done so many times and are comfortable with and good with. And ask it if there's a way to improve it. And then ask it, how can we automate these activities? Or should we even rethink how we approach this completely, right? That's the first thing, is should we rethink this? We don't want to disrupt our business, but maybe in the process of rethinking it, we can come up with some tweaks to improve what we're doing, and then ask it how we automate these functions, or which functions can we automate, and then ask it to prioritize from the ones that are the least costly to automate and can be done the quickest to the ones that would take more effort and time to automate, and have it build a priority list of automation tasks, each one that we should be able to put into activity once it's done, to see a boost in our ability to produce. So the idea for me is, okay, right now I have a virtual assistant that's doing my marketing outreach for podcast related stuff, right? And we've got that playbook really pretty well defined now. So, but as I scale, I don't want to get more VAs. I just want my VA to be better at doing more of these, right? And we will hit a point at some point where that's capacity is hit, but we've automated a lot. Maybe she's now able to handle 5 times or 6 times or 7 times the capacity she could with the automation. And we bring somebody, and AI is documenting the changes in the playbook along the way. Now we bring new people in, and we can scale much faster, much bigger, with much less cost, right? So that's how I approach it internally. I don't know if there is a better way to do, but I think I feel pretty solid that this will be hugely effective. And then, of course, there's all kinds of tools that you can use to do different pieces of this automation, depending on the thing that you're trying to automate. But that's what I would say. If you're a business, think in terms of playbooks. What are the common things that you do on a regular basis that are manually that require a person to do it? And it could be a phone call, and voice. It could be sending communications of custom communications with people, or responding to communications in a very specific way, and being able to document the results of those. It doesn't matter what it is, document these things. Whereas if your business doubled in size, how would you bring a new person in so that that person can now get up to speed very easily and quickly, and they have a way of measuring whether they're doing something correctly or not. And that's what, to me, a playbook is, right? And when you have that, you can start to, then you can talk to somebody like me, or just ask AI, what would I automate here? And what can I improve in my workflow, and things like that. That's how I would go about it as a small business.
Yeah, one thing that I'll bring up here, because I had a really great meeting about it just yesterday, is probably about 2 months ago, we released some you call them a playbook. I've had other people, like our buddy Tim Chakura calls them workstations, right? But it's basically, hey, you land here, this is how you do your job, right? Here's your functions, here's your different things, and it's easy. You know how to do it. and AI is checking you along the way. And then obviously you still have to understand that AI isn't perfect, right? And it might, let's say, hallucinate. But I was talking, I just built a couple tools for our GTM group. And so we do a meeting every week because we want to get a pulse, right? Like, are you using the tools? Where, are there any challenges, right? Can we refine these, right? And I think one of the biggest thing is making sure that you don't just release the tool, release this workflow automation, and then like, that's it, we're not going to look at this. And so I said, hey, so, how are you guys doing with it? Are you having any good wins? And one of our guys, Mark, was like, are you kidding me? He's like, honestly, without this set of tools, I would be lost. He's like, I don't even understand how I did my job before you built these tools.
Right.
And so I was like, whoa, that's like killer, So he said, this is how I operate all day. I use the tools, right? And so
it feels really good when you make that kind of impact, right?
Yeah. And he's in sales, and that allows him to be on calls and talking to customers and doing the relational parts of his job instead of the transactional parts, right? So, that's great, David. And I know you told us even a couple little bits of other stories too, right? These automations, folks, are once you figure them out, and to David's point, and Wendy Reeves says it too, like, you have to understand the process, what you do, how you do that playbook manually before you automate it, right? It has to be very well, it has to be efficient, and you have to have a good process for it. Otherwise, you're just making something that's inefficient faster, right? Which doesn't really move the needle. So,
right. Yeah, you always have to reinvent how you do things. Sometimes if you can make it enough faster, then it does move the needle, right? It may be a repetitive process that could be done better, but if you make it fast enough, it becomes invisible because it won't create a bottleneck until you scale many times beyond where you are. Whereas today it might be creating a bottleneck. So, and you have to do that kind of assessment too. But some of the other things, like there's one tool from one of my clients who's in healthcare, and they have an AI nurse that is like talking to a real nurse on the phone. Wow. You can even interrupt her and say, no, that's not what I'm talking about. She'll say, I'm sorry. Can you explain, what's different about what you're talking about versus what I thought it was? And then you do, and she go, oh, okay, now I understand. It's like a real conversation. And the person can even say, I'm just kind of sad right now. That she might start, just saying, I'm sorry you feel that way. Tell me why you're sad, and start kind of giving, it might be somebody who's older, who feels isolated, right? But that's not the purpose of the tool. I'm just saying these are some of the side effects. The purpose of the tool is to basically automate really manual workflows that require somebody with specialized nursing skills. That is a tedious process, like transitioning somebody from the hospital to long-term care. That's a good example. And to be able to make an not infinite, but like an unlimited number of calls for large numbers of patients at the time that patient really needs the call to get this transition support, right? Explanation of what's going on, a phone number they can call if they have questions, which would be the AI nurse again. Explanation of services that they can expect, giving basically, and very patient, and answer any questions. And there's no time gap and no additional cost negligible cost in terms of how long the call takes, because there's not a limited number of 2 people doing this for hundreds of patients, right? There's hundreds of calls happening in parallel, however many needs to happen, and they happen just at the right time. So that's an example of a massive value for healthcare system that's understaffed right now. It doesn't replace nurses, but it takes the pressure off the fact that nurses can't get anywhere near as much of this done as they need to, right? And this is not the part of their job they really want to be spending their time doing either.
Exactly.
So
it's menial work, right? Yep.
Right. Now, here's one that we're going to be doing. Oh, so go ahead, Rico.
No, go ahead.
Here's one that we're planning on doing based on a discussion I had this week with my director of operations in terms of our teams. What's one of the things that every development team has to do every single morning, and that's a stand-up. Not every team, but anybody that's using any kind of modern methodology, development methodology, right? You do a stand-up where everybody in your immediate team is talking about what they got done yesterday, what they're planning on doing today, and any dependencies that are outstanding. And that's all you do. But it still takes 15 to 30 minutes. I mean, if you're really good at it, it's 15 minutes, right? But usually it takes 20 to 30 minutes to get through it. Something comes up, people start to discuss it, and then it takes the Scrum Master, whoever's running it, has to say, okay, we'll handle that afterwards on a one-on-one or whatever.
Right.
So we're going to build an AI agent that pulls in all this information from Jira and Confluence and identifies anything from email communications that may be relevant, pulls together and does an automated Scrum with a stand-up with the developer right before any Scrum meeting. And then we may eliminate them altogether, or we may have a quick 1-minute call to say, is there anything that didn't get addressed in your meeting with Gerald, whatever we're going to call the Scrum agent, right?
This is awesome, by the way. This is, listen, I'm thinking about, so a couple things. One, I personally wouldn't get rid of a daily meeting, especially in a distributed remote work environment, because what people like to do is that's how they get a human connection, right? But in the same breath,
right.
In the same breath, though, having Gerald give me a rundown so that I'm like, and I mean, that's just so freaking valuable to understand and aggregate the data from all the channels, including email and Teams and whatever, maybe it's Slack for your company, right? So, but aggregating all that data and really having a rundown of what WTF did I do yesterday? Because you know what happens, people are moving. And they may not even give themselves credit for all the stuff that they've done, right? So having that just quickly delivered to them, I could see that being transformational, and that's just fantastic. That's super cool that you guys are doing that.
So one of the things I want my team to do is every day talk about what they're going to try to do today using AI to improve, to improve what they're doing, whether it's make it better, make it faster, whatever that is. So that may be what happens in our stand-ups. And so
there you go. Yeah.
That and any dependencies that have to get discussed that have several people involved, right? So you say, okay,
that's a good purpose for them. Yes.
Right. So the Scrum Master now is looking at whoever's running it, right? It's looking at the result of the stand-ups and sees that there are 6 points that may be a problem with people with dependencies moving forward, spends 5 minutes on those, gets those addressed, and spends 10 minutes now doing an intake on, okay, what's your AI thing today? And everybody's got to come up with something, even if it's the same as yesterday. I'm going to continue to do this. Okay, what value have you gotten out of it so far? No value. Okay, do you think you're going to, or is it something you should come up with a new one tomorrow? Like that.
Yeah.
And change the whole need for those meetings so that it's almost like having affirmations in the morning, right? So if you have your list of things you read every day as your starting day kind of process, like I have one, I met somebody recently, really successful, and he was doing it. And I thought, I know this works because you just keep sticking those ideas in your mind every morning. Right. And you just start to make them happen unconsciously. Right. If you say it every single day, week in, week out, no matter what day of the week it is. And there's like 20 things, right? One's for family, one's for the company, one's for finance, like that sort of thing. One's for health and one's for exercise. And there's 3 or 4 things under each one of those. And there's a certain kind of format you follow. So they have punch and impact and they're generalized enough. So why not turn our stand-up meeting into something like that every day about AI, but not aphorisms, but talking about planting that seed of this is what I'm going to do, and knowing I have to be doing something to
keeps it on their minds. Yeah, they're accountable. They're accountable.
I want to take credit for the agent, Scrum agent thing, but that was my director of operations guy.
That's great. No, I love
great use.
I love that idea.
Yep.
And we were going to go directly into like trends for the future, but I was thinking about it. And one of the things we have on the agenda, David, is last episode, I had talked about how you had showed me Bolt and I showed you Replit, and you've completely migrated to Replit. So a question for you I have is, how do tools like Replit change the game for developers and business, right? Like, and how have you seen those gains with the, some of the tools and the features that Replit has, like their agents, right?
Right. I mean, I'm imagining how it's going to change the game. Starting to use Replit made me realize that we really need to reinvent ourselves again completely, because what we're doing as developers and building apps just won't be the same thing next year. In a year from now, it'll be. And the ones that are still trying to do it the same, and they're not going to go away in terms of demand, but they're just going to be so pretty far behind the curve in a year if they're still, even if they're, and a lot of shops aren't even doing modern things from a methodology perspective, from a automation perspective, a DevOps, CI/CD, automation, automated testing. I mean, all the things that are like the buzzwords, right? That are kind of modern shops, right? They're not even doing all that stuff. But next year, all that stuff will just happen in this time next year, potentially. So from a predictive standpoint, just how fast things like Replit are coming along. Like, for example, we need a referral partner portal because we're building this network of referral partners. So we have to have a way for a referral partner to easily add a referral if they have one, or we pull it, they send me an email with the referral, and the portal is watching emails and automatically creates the record for them, knowing what their referral fee rate is and things like that. And then that way a partner can go log into their dashboard and see, there's 8 referrals that I've given. Here's the status of each one. 2 of them, actually, we've got contracts and now are accruing some commissions for me. And this is what's paid out, over the last 9 months or whatever. And I'm building the whole thing with Replit in my spare time for the last week and a half. And I've got much of the first version of this done. So awesome. What does that mean? Okay, do we do these high fidelity prototypes anymore, or do we actually build a application prototype instead?
That's right.
Use Replit to have Replit basically have it describe the design to it and have it build out the screens and the workflows, and then have it wire all that up after we're comfortable with, we think the design is good, and build it as an application and get an MVP out in a month or 3 weeks or 2 weeks or a week, right? Mm-hmm. And go out to the market and do some pre-launch sales with this tool that was built by Replit to prove that there's a product. And now you've got something they can start using. It might even scale to a decent amount because Replit allows you to deploy it into an auto-scaling server, right?
Yes, it really does. I mean, you can get something that I would say, unless you're like Twitter, it could scale pretty well, right? Like you'll hit the limits at some point, but to your point, that partner portal probably isn't going to be getting like a ton of play, right? Like hopefully it is.
You don't know that.
Because I want you to get a lot of partners and a lot of partner activity. Right. You know what I mean? I think about the amount of data that could and would flow through that, even if you're doing really well. It's not a ton, right? So
this might be all we need, right?
Yeah.
But I also then I can put a SaaS front end on it, and so my partners, if they want to use it, right, then they are paying me $20 a month, and now they're using it as their own partner portal.
Yes.
And if you've got 5 people that you're referring projects to, you have one dashboard that's consolidated, right, for all of it.
Yeah, I love this. So I love the idea. Yeah, it's great.
It's a handy tool.
Yeah. I'm still like shaking my head. We have a team meeting tomorrow where I'm basically going to show this to the team, right? And they all laugh at me that I built it, right? Because my development skills are a little rusty. When you start building a company, you don't get to play with. I love coding. It's like my favorite thing to do, which is why sometimes I'll take on these hobby projects for friends of mine, like that workflow automation for the guy with the network. Anyway, but I don't get to do it very often, right? So my skills are a little rusty for any particular technology, right? So they don't need to be that good anymore because AI is.
They don't need to be
AI
that good. I will say this: you need to know how to debunk what comes out of. I know you're already thinking it and you're doing it, but to folks and our listeners, you need to be good enough to know what's coming out of what's coming out of it is good, bad, what needs to be modified. Because Replit is great, but the first thing I did with Replit Agents was asked it to build a Django app, which is a Python framework, and with these specific things. And it built me a Flask app, which is different, but similar, but different, right? And it worked, but it wasn't what I asked for. And if you didn't know the fundamental differences between those two frameworks, it's a massive difference. Then you would never know any better, right? You just say, "Oh, I got this pretty thing," and it works. Like I click the button, right? So, So with
let me qualify what I said.
Sure.
Let me qualify. Like when it comes to approaches and architecture and things like that, I'm coaching my team, even my most senior guys still. Just that comes from experience or database design or, things that you just learn all the nuances of what can tank you and what will make it really scale and be resilient and reduce maintenance over time because you can build on it and expand it instead of it starting to become heavier and heavier. And, in terms of those kind of architectural concepts and what it means from a technical implementation perspective, I understand that really well. I just don't have to remember how to write the syntax for something.
Totally agree. It's like Linux commands, right? It's like Linux commands. I know what Linux can do, and I know exactly what I need to Google to get my exact Linux command. Now I use ChatGPT for all Linux stuff. It's so good with that, man. Like you can have it with you have a bash script, whatever. It's just so good because these are like these minute little things that we shouldn't be keeping in our head anyway. We should just know what can be done and what, at a basic high level, what should be done. And to your point, David, thanks for clarifying, because I 100% agree with you. The specifics of what used to be called a code jockey, where you're just like, oh, I type code, that's my job. That's going away. Like, I mean, way sooner, I think, than some people think. And it's really going to be about just knowing how to guide things through. And to your point, some of those skills of experience where it's like, hey, what's likely to tank us? That's a great way to say it. I mean, like, and that's something that you gain from experience. So you're always going to want to have these people with experience that are guiding the people that you're going to want to have good code reviews, right? That's one thing, right? And even if you go to like an AI code review, which we've started to do some of that, like as a first pass, right? Which saves you time. So it's like, it's the menial work of, hey, did this hit or not hit these basic things, right? Oh, it didn't? Great. Right. I'm not even going to look at your code review. But for that code to get through and actually go get pushed to production, heck there's going to be some scrutiny there, right? So from your senior architects, developers, and whatnot, and you need that. So no, that's awesome. So thinking about that's the kind of the future, part of the future of coding. What other predictions of crazy stuff? We had some conversations that were like, whoa. Yeah. And so I want to get your take on what other predictions you think are happening over the next couple of years that are going to be directly outcomes of AI.
Okay. So some things that are really hard to predict in terms of like maybe in 5 years or 10 years, do we even need programs anymore? Or will AI just assemble the workflow as it's needed real time, as you're asking it to do things, and then it sees the patterns? And I don't know. I'm just saying that's a possibility that I've kind of been pondering. And what does that mean? And how do you do something today that'll have some kind of resilience in 3 or 4 years from now? It is very, very tough to predict. Or maybe. And this is scary for all the creatives in the world right now, especially today with Sora coming out. Maybe we don't have movie and film and TV production anymore because AI is generating it real time based on your real time feedback as you're watching it by your how you respond and you laugh and it's picking that up and creating stories as you're watching it. And that these are not pre-produced things. They're just custom designed for you. That's one.
If I could, just on that, we did a roundtable a while back, and Mike K, you remember this one, Mike? He threw out. He said he can't wait. He can't wait until it gets to the point where he can sit down on the couch and say, "This is what I'd like to see," and give a general like storyline and the type of characters he wants to see, and have AI just literally, think for a moment. And with the release of Sora, I'm sure that'll be coming sometime in the near future. But then AI will just create the storyline, add the characters and everything, and then you're watching, original content that you kind of created yourself, but you just gave it, the idea of what you want to talk about or what you'd like to see. So
and then it's testing things like, did he laugh at that, not laugh at that, right? And it's monitoring you real time, and it's getting to know you better and better so that it creates a comedy that you literally cannot, like your stomach's falling apart.
You can't breathe.
Every single note and the timing and right. I mean, I could see this at some point. I don't know when. I don't know if that's 3 years away or 30 years away, right? But 30 years seems like everything's a lot closer. I used to think what AI is doing today, and 4 years ago, I would have said that's 15 years out, not 4 years. Well, actually, I would have said 15 years, and it probably wouldn't have thought it was this good. So here's one thing I believe is predictable, which I think you guys know because we talked about this, but if you're invested in multi-level parking structures or any kind of a parking structure, like multi-level garages outside of stadiums or in an office building or underground parking lots like under a mall or whatever, sell it today. Because in somewhere between 3 and 7 years, I don't know when that tipping point will happen, but it'll happen very quickly. There won't be any cars parked there anymore because of auto driving, right? Things like when Tesla comes out with their auto taxi, and Waymo's already out, which I've ridden in Waymo's, and they're pretty friggin' amazing. And then you've got, and then the people will stop buying cars. And the few people that they'll stop buying cars because it costs a lot to own a car, way more than it'll cost for you to be driven everywhere by these competitive auto driving taxis, right? And they'll be so available that you'll be able to get one in a minute or two always, because somebody in your neighborhood will probably still own a car somewhere because they're making money off this auto taxi, and there will be a critical mass of these vehicles available, so that when you say, "Hey, I'm leaving now," and you finish brushing your teeth, you walk outside, it'll be waiting for you already. So, and it's much safer. So, and it'll be much more dangerous to drive a car, because it is dangerous to drive a car today. We're just used to it, but it'll be much safer. So it'll only be people that can afford it and that just really want to drive and love to drive that'll have cars.
Right.
Because I know, and that'll be true. Or let's say you have a pickup because you like to haul stuff, right? So you would just say, get a pickup to help you haul whatever it is you're buying. That'll be the thing you get, and it'll be there like almost immediately, because there's an infinite number of pickups on the road, and they'll all be self-driving pickups. There'll be some exceptions for that, I think. Like for people that live in rural areas, that'll take a lot longer before this sort of thing might be available there in that kind of number. Obviously, for people that use their vehicle for work, like construction vehicles and things like that. Now, there'll be exceptions, obviously, but for the typical driver going to work or going to the store or going to a friend's or entertainment, those, I think it'll be a massive shift. I don't know what the automakers are going to do because the demand is going to shift, and the need for as many vehicles on the road is going to go dramatically down, because they'll just be so much more efficient. So there's
I think. Well, how do you think the adoption would be by the public? I mean, do you think that'll be like a phased approach where it'll be some people that are still skeptical now? I mean, you've seen AI adoption in your own business, let's say. How do you think the public at large is going to adopt that? Or do you think people are still going to be a little resistant to giving up their freedoms to their own vehicles?
Well, I'm an early adopter, of course. So I've been in a Waymo a couple different times in Phoenix, right? My wife and my mom are both saying you're crazy, and I'm thinking to myself, no, you just don't really.
I'm tired of driving, right?
So, yeah, it's nice. I can sit there and play chess while I'm going, going from wherever, and it'll pick you up right at the airport now, in Phoenix. That was new in the last month, right with all the other ride shares. It just navigates in between them, and it'll drop you off there. And it now all goes all the way to my mother's place, which is way north. And at the moment, it's still in the city because they hadn't turned it on freeways yet, but that's only a month away, probably. And then it'll get there in the same amount of time, and it's half the cost of Uber. And they don't even have any competitive pressure on them yet. So, but once there's a critical mass to this, and I think there'll be a big wave of the public that basically starts using them because they're getting in one with a friend, or because they're finding out that everybody is taking one to work and they're the only ones driving to work, and people are thinking, "Are you crazy?" So they'll try it, realize how really incredibly cool it is. It'll happen fast. It'll happen really, really fast. It'll hit a certain critical mass. Like I said, 3 years, 7 years, somewhere in there. I think somewhere in between that range. And that's really purely guess. It's not based on anything except for my experience I had with something massively disruptive like this with that I saw with Uber. So I don't know if I mentioned this story to you last time or not, but I used to travel to India a lot, 15 times starting in 2010 until the first week of the pandemic, because I was building my teams there. And people that say that they work offshore and had bad experiences is because they were throwing basically a project over the wall to some team in India that they really didn't know, right? If you can't expect to have a team that works in a particular type of culture that you're trying to build if you don't get to know them personally and spend time with them, and establish some of the basic fundamental tenets. And then you build an exceptional team no matter where they are in the world. So I spent, for the first 6 years I went there, 6 or 7 years, till 2015, because I started actually in 2008 traveling there. So make that 17 trips. But 2010, 2015, every time I would go, land in Mumbai, and I'd take a drive. I'd have somebody pick me up because there's no way I was going to drive there.
Right.
Because it's just nuts, right? It's opposite the other side of the road, and there are
volume.
Back then, there were literally no rules, and there were, like, in the city of Pune that had 5.5, 6 million people. There were like 5 traffic lights in the whole city.
Wow!
So people just had to figure out how to get through intersections without dying, right? And there weren't stop signs. I mean, there just was no traffic control. That's changed a lot since then, but this was back in 2011, 12, 13, and there was this infinite sea of tuk-tuks or autos. There are these 3-wheel motorized rickshaws, no matter where you went. I mean, that's not, I would be picked up in a car, but there was probably 10 of those motorized rickshaws to every car. And then also there were 10 motorcycles as well. So it was like motorcycles and these 3-wheel rickshaws. Then I didn't go for 15 months between 2015 and 16, and I came back and I got in the car to go to Pune, and I thought something is really different. I couldn't really put my finger on it. Then after we were driving for a little bit, I realized I'm surrounded by cars, not tuk-tuks. What happened to all the tuk-tuks? And so when we got to the office, and I thought it had to be government regulation, nothing could possibly eliminate millions of these vehicles and their drivers all, literally overnight. Yeah. I got to the office. I asked Shalaka, she was our director of that office at the time. And I said, because we had Shalaka's one team and Gayatri was a different team, because I mentioned Gayatri earlier. Anyway, so I asked Shalaka, what happened to all the autos? She says, well, Uber came to India about 6 months ago and they won't approve them. And whammo, an entire class of vehicles and all the people that own those cars were literally wiped out overnight. Wow. And the people that started Uber, which was only 6 years before, weren't sitting there in their garage going, just imagine in only 5 or 6 years, we can wipe out a whole class of these vehicles in Southeast Asia, right? I mean, obviously they're not thinking like that. Yeah. Which I always say, things that are truly disruptive like this are never intended to disrupt in the ways that they end up disrupting, right?
Right.
So did Elon Musk say we're going to get rid of all these parking structures? No, of course not. But when we hit that critical mass, it's going to happen fast.
For sure.
Just like it did. By the way, all those vehicles came back because a competitive service came out like a year later. I think it was called Awala or Duwala or something like that. That was an India-based company, and they approved them. And then, of course, to compete, Uber had to approve them as well. And then overnight, they're all back.
They're back.
They're back. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So on the business aspect, staying in the same theme as far as adoption, you had some experience now with it. What advice would you give to businesses to get to AI adoption, maybe amongst the employees or B2B relationships?
And that's probably a really good but really hard question to answer, because people, it's a mindset thing. So whatever you can do, right? Whatever you can do to constantly put it in front of them, and then to guide them into using it for something on a daily basis, or at least a couple times a week with everybody in your team, so that they start to just think about it when they're doing something. That's what you need to do. Explore ways that it can help them in their personal life as well as in business. That you feel is safe, that's not going to expose your business in any negative way to things that you might like, intellectual property and being, where AI is using that to train. And there's lots of tools you can use and ways of protecting privacy that are pretty much like cloud is. Everybody uses the cloud now. Nobody worries about it in the way that they did 7-8 years ago. And it's like that with AI. You don't have to worry about it as long as you take some basic precautions, have your privacy settings set properly in the tool that you're using, make sure you understand what the privacy capabilities of that tool are, that they're not using your data to train the model, that you have a little private garden wall around your data, and then you use it. And explore what tools are out there that you can use that might be a benefit to your people on your team and that you can introduce to them. A really, really good one that's probably that's ubiquitous in terms of how it can be applied as Notebook LM, which I love, because it becomes your own little private AI garden for
what is it called? What is this thing?
Notebook LM from Google.
Notebook LM, from Google. Yep.
Yeah, right. And it's just a very low-hanging fruit is kind of product where you can upload any document, put links in there for content that you wanted to learn about, and then you can ask it anything about that content, and it's very specific in terms of what it's trained on now. It's a large language model informed by your specific content. You can even create a discussion about that content by just clicking a button, and now you've got two people talking and they sound like real people talking about the content you put up there, summarizing it, creating really intuitive insights about that content, surfacing things you might not have realized about your content. In fact, we did it when it first came out, like in the first few days, pointed it to my website, tekyz.com. And of course, we're blown away because these two people are like having a podcast episode talking about what we do, and very edgy, kind of cool conversation. And they said, well, these guys have been doing it for, this concept of launch first, and they've had this for several years. That's like dog years in tech time. I was like, these are kind of nuanced, cool things that it's doing. It also was talking about some of the messaging down halfway down on our website about some of our capabilities that was not messaged properly, and we didn't realize it until we heard them talk about how they perceived it. And we go back and read it and go, it's exactly right. So, like, you just use it as an evaluation tool, right? Like for that. But or to say, summarize all this for me, put it into a certain form so that I can present this to a customer, or create a proposal for me. Here's all of the parameters, or you can do anything with it, right? And it just focuses on your content. So that's a good way to start to introduce it.
Yeah, we did an experiment a while back, and Mike, maybe you could remember the tool it was, but where it created a script, and it sounded like a man and a woman talking on a podcast, and
that's
they were
it.
even doing
That's it. Notebook
what it
is the thing. Yeah, exactly.
And we had added the audio to it. And they were doing the ums and ahs as they talked through the conversation.
They stop and pause, and that's what got me. Is
convincing.
Like it's
if
very.
You didn't know.
Yeah,
you would
exactly.
Not know.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you didn't hear it from the other 100 people that have released podcast episodes about their Notebook LM thing, because that's the one. That's the one thing I will say is I wish I could do different voices, like change the speakers in there. That would be gold. And I think there's another thing that actually allows you to do that. So because it's so good,
there is some guide. You can guide it now. You can guide the conversation. Awesome. Yeah, they just came out with that like last week. Nice. Where you can guide I don't know about the voices yet. I think they may have that now. There was a really funny one that somebody did and published where basically they explained to Notebook LM that you're not a real person, that you're an AI. Anyway, and so then they had these two people talking and says, I don't know what to do with this information, that I'm not real. Well, and she said, what about my family? She says, well, yeah, I mean, you still have a family, right? I says, well, I don't know. I mean, I called my mom and that number didn't exist and neither did she. No, I think I'm really an AI.
Wow.
Come on.
That's
really funny.
We're going to have to find that.
Yeah, we will have to find that for sure, David. And, we were talking about podcasts. So and generating them. So speaking of podcasts, David, you've actually got a new podcast coming out. You want to kind of tell us what the podcast is about, what motivated you to start it?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm doing a lot of interviews now, and because the world is changing so fast, and I think it's important that people hear my voice, and at least from my opinion, what I think about it as a way of branding. Tekyz, talking about what it means to be an exceptional software company, talking about AI and how it's impacting the world and the development scene. And then I thought, you know what, I really probably ought to be in doing my own podcast on the same thing. So that my first interview is supposed to be tomorrow. I postponed it for a few days, but we're starting it, it's starting literally right away. And then I'll publish it as soon as we've done 3 interviews. So it'll be within a week and a half, it'll be published. And it's called Scaling Smarter. And I'll be interviewing CEOs and CTOs, kind of like you guys, of companies that are either are successful or have failed or are in startup mode, right? All of those, with the idea of learning what problems they've run into, how they overcame them, or what happened when they didn't overcome them and how big an impact it had on them, how AI is impacting what they're doing or how they're leveraging it to solve these problems. So it's going to be that kind of a podcast,
Wow.
It'll blend between startups and scale-ups.
I like that you're actually open, you're going to focus on the entire sphere of how things can go, right? Because understanding the failures is just as beneficial, that as understanding the successes, right? And a lot of times the failures are what ends up ultimately leading to the success because you've learned what things could bite you, right? So, I'm super excited to catch the podcast. Is that going to be a weekly podcast, David, or is it pretty much just going to you're going to
probably be 2 or 3 episodes a week is what I'm shooting for.
Oh, wow.
So 10 roughly. And they'll be shorter at least initially. They'll be much shorter kind of episodes to really kind of focus on a microcosm of somebody's business and experience. And that may change, right? So they may change to the longer format ones, more like yours. I'm using the guidance of somebody that suggested try the short format first to create more punch in the podcast initially, and we'll see if that works or not. I like talking, all right, and I like listening to people that want to talk. So I have a feeling it'll probably expand into longer things. And the one thing I'll say though regarding AI is just channel your inner 5-year-old. When you're thinking about it. Think
That's
like
how
a
we
kid.
started, I think.
Yeah.
Rico's good at channeling his inner 5-year-old. I don't think he's growing
Yeah.
past that, honestly.
It's more an external 5-year-old
that's
than
why he's so
internal.
good
but
at
yeah.
this. That's why he's so good at this.
Well, a friend of mine told me about his granddaughter, who was 3 years old, walking, and she had never seen a book because her family was all digital. Or 2.5-year-old, and they don't read to her, but they have everything digital and iPads and all that, right? And keep her interested and engaged with kid learning stuff on that. She walks up to his coffee table, which is full of these magazines, and she walks up to the magazine and she starts to go like this on the magazine, and her eyebrows, she might have been 2.5, and her eyebrows kind of knit together. She looked up at him, and then he picked it up and flipped the pages, and her eyes got huge because she had no idea.
Yeah.
Right. She thought it was everything's digital and you slide your finger around on it to make it happen. So that's what I mean by channel your inner 5-year-old, right? You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Sure.
So just click on everything and try everything, and don't be afraid.
Love it.
Definitely. Yeah. So once you come out with your first episode, you have to let us know, and we'll put it in our AI Bytes newsletter. We'll start, kind of pushing that for you to see if we can get some traction for you early on. But is there anything else you want to add, David, as we wrap up here?
Well, yeah, I want you guys to commit to me on the air that you're going to be that you'll let me interview you on my new podcast here in the next.
What I didn't want to impose, but I was actually I wanted to.
I was hoping
now, and so I'm really glad. Guess what? We're all aligned. Well, we'd love to be on the show, David. And I was actually thinking, I have a couple of founder friends that, or people that have been at senior executive levels in companies that have helped grow them, and they will have some great battle stories for you. So,
I love that.
Pushing some folks your way because I think that's such a compelling podcast. I'm super excited to listen to it, and absolutely, we'd love to be guests on the show. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I figured you want to be, but I just thought I'd throw that out like that. And just be fearless. That's all I can say is be fearless but that doesn't mean be, blindly forge ahead either. Right. The one thing, there was a study done, there's a podcast on happiness called the Happiness Lab. That's pretty well known. It's a Stanford professor that started this thing. Anyway, she has an amazing story. She started a course at Stanford on happiness. And she didn't know that she's a psychology PhD. And she ended up, the class had, got full almost instantly. And then she started to make it online, and she ended up like 150, 200,000 people signing up for it. And so she started this podcast. So, and she interviews people about what makes people happy, right? And one of the episodes was on CEOs and this idea of power of positive thinking, and it's a myth, that you just keep forging ahead, you keep saying something positive, because all these really successful CEOs, when you ask them why they were successful, they say, well, I was just the right place at the right time, and we were lucky and we had good vision. But you scratch the surface just a little bit, and it turns out these are very anxious people who are afraid of everything's going to come and tank their business. And they just imagine all these ways of failing, and then they work out mitigation strategies. If this happens, if that happens, so they're like brilliant mitigation planners. And by doing that, no matter what happens, they had a mitigation strategy for it, right? So to them, it's like, well, we were lucky. It all worked out.
Wow, that's great. No, that's great. And I'm thinking about the people that I know that I'm really close to that are founders, and they are exactly like that, right? Like something that 5 years, let's say 5, 6, 7 years ago, when I wasn't in an executive level at a company, and I thought, oh gosh, this one thing happened, and what are we gonna do? And then I talked to the CEO, and he was like really unfazed by. He's like, yes, and we're already thinking about and 5 years later, he was spot on, and everything is fine. You're gonna have bumps in the road. But there's that healthy fear, to your point, David, and they teach you that in the military too, right? In different situations, it's like a healthy fear, so that you have enough to understand that there could be a serious problem, and that you figure out ways around that, right? Like I was, I forgot which book it was I was reading, They're talking about the most successful people, in a job are the people who are looking forward and trying to like figure out like what could happen. Like, let's say a truck driver, right? Like a big semi truck driver, he's looking forward and like playing a game. Like, oh, if that car moved right over here, I would do this, right? And and I've taken that to heart, and so I do that in my life. It's like, what could happen? How would I adjust, right? And so that's exactly how entrepreneurs function, like naturally, I think. So
right, yeah. In fact, that's funny that you mentioned the truck driver, because I remember everybody talked about being a defensive driver, and I just naturally kind of did that from the time I was young. Like when it was raining, heavy rain, I was 16 or 17. It was fun, but for me, it was also just learning how to control my car in the rain. I go to big, giant parking lots that were completely empty at night and just do donuts and spin my car out and learn how to, and I can't tell you how many times that has saved me from being in an accident. Or when I'm getting on the freeway ramp and I see there's somebody in the frontage road and they're literally parallel with me, I think I better slow down. What happens? And then I had that. I was with my wife one day and I slowed down and the guy, it just cut right over, right? They didn't have their blinker on. They didn't look for me. If I was there, it would have been. She said, "How did you know they were going to do that?" I said, "I had no idea, but I knew if he tried that, he had no place to go and we'd be in an accident. So I just slowed down just to take the risk out." And you're right. So it's like that running a business if you run it well.
Sure. If you run it well. Yep. All right, David. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show for this second segment. Rico, this was fantastic. We're definitely gonna have to get back together, and like you said, we'll come on your show, and we should do another. There's so much to talk about, right? There's always so much to talk about, and in 3 months, our strategy of development is going to be probably even different than it is today. So,
dramatically different.
Yeah, dramatically different. Yeah. Exactly. So, folks, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're liking the content. And we'll see you back in the lab soon.
See you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Great conversation.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Stay connected with us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn for all the latest updates. And check out Antics.tv or our YouTube channel at Artificial Antics. We'll see you back in the lab soon. We want to give a huge shout out to Nick and the team at Nomad Studios for mastering the Artificial Antics podcasts. Want to level up your audio visual game? www.nomadstudios.pro.